resort to that, don't we? So please bring your focus to the meeting and we're going to make a beginning. And I'll hand to Mr. Drummond for our opening karakia. Thank you.
Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho, tuia tatou te tangata, ki te kaupapa o te hui nei, ki te kaupapa o te rangi nei. Mori ora, kia ora tatou katoa.
Kia ora, thank you. I welcome everybody to this Environment and Regulatory meeting. We do have some people on Zoom, so Councillor Walker is on Zoom. Can I see that? Not yet. So she may come in and I'm sure we'll keep an eye on hands up for anything from Councillor Walker, and board member David Armstrong is on Zoom. Welcome, David. And a reminder that we have media here in the room, welcome, and Catherine's on Zoom as well. The meeting's being recorded and will be available on Council's YouTube channel. And I need to advise the meeting of the toilets to the left and exit. Welcome Councillor Walker, who is on Zoom. Thank you. So we're going to move to apologies. We have apologies from Councillors Greening and Mackenzie and the Mayor for lateness. If somebody's happy to move. Thank you. Councillor Butler, I'd forgotten your name there for a moment. And a seconder, Councillor Maru, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried, thank you. We're going to move to public forum. So we've got one speaker registered for public forum, which is Paul Sangster. Welcome, Paul. Come up to the table and the mic. You know this drill pretty well. 5 minutes. I'll give you a little signal at 4:30, Paul.
And it's just about the flooding at Tākaka, really. So quickly, in 1880s, they put a railway line in, and it diverted water into town whenever there was a big flood. So they put a rock wall in 1906 to stop that water getting to the railway line. In the 1950s, they bulldozed it away in places so that they could drive a truck in and back up and dump rock over the side to fortify the bank. They never replaced that. In 67, we had a flood. Wasn't a bad one, but it was enough to be annoying. And then in 83, we had a major one, which flooded the town quite seriously, or parts of the town, I should say, quite seriously. I was state insurance agent at the time, being in the state office, and I, along with the CD organiser, Graham Drummond, we marked the town out for the flooding, and we took the heights of the water, regardless of whether it was a splash lot or not. And we said, you know, that was sort of a rough guide. Golden Bay County, I got on in 86, and we decided to make every building from then on 300 above the 83 flood, which would give us that clear board. That went right way through until 2006. I wasn't on council. Noel Riley and Stuart Borlase were, and for some reason we built a supermarket with 6 steps. Anyway, and since then we've had this confusing heights right through town, and it doesn't make sense. We've got a Hammer Hardware 1.2 million metres off the ground. We're building a shop at the moment, which I think is not too bad. It's about 600 or 700 off the ground, not too bad. But we're now building houses on the racecourse where we wouldn't allow a hospital to be built because it was a floodplain. We're allowing them 300 off the ground. And it seems that it's just a matter of how much the ticket is clicked before the decision is made. And if you're a millionaire like the housing group is, then great. At Pahara, we're building a dam and a bun wall around a swamp, and we're going to put houses in that. That's okay, apparently. You can mitigate it. Chris Bennett has walls around his property that he was going to develop, and in fact, it can be easily mitigated, and you've turned it down. And then we get a letter from the chief executive to say it's not mitigation anymore, it's now avoidance. Well, if it's avoidance, and Chris was right when he wrote back to her, was that in fact the housing group in Mahana Street shouldn't be allowed to continue. They've made some alternative suggestions, ones beside the supermarket. It's laughable. I'm sorry, it's laughable. I mean, that if you've got a supermarket, you've got a fire station, which is the normal 300 off the high, which you now use as a emergency centre, and a supermarket right next door to it, 800 above the fire station floor. It just doesn't make sense. So I'd really like, Chris, if you could get your committee to come over in a minibus, and we'll meet at the top of town. I'll show you the two little knobs in the top of town with houses. The motels next door who fought against council staff's recommendation to go up 800, and he got it at the right height, 300 off the ground, or it's actually 400 off the ground, the motels. Sensible, understandable. We've got a library that was built in 2012, sensible, understandable. Why are these others so different? And it just makes it really difficult to understand. And then we go and muck around with the street in Mahana Street, and I'm sorry, it's a shocking thing, and I'll see an accident, a bad accident there. That is our main thoroughfare to the wharf, where there's going to be 300,000 tonnes of rock go to Wellington, and you've got all the lime that goes through there to the boat, and you've also got all the milk from the school out west goes down that street. And we've made it to a narrow 3-metre lane. And last night I drove down it to the factory. I was going to a meeting, and you've got a vehicle coming towards you. You cannot see the curbs on your left-hand side. There will be an accident. And I'm sorry, this council staff, somewhere along the line, someone will be responsible, as far as I'm concerned. Get back to my section. It's not my section. The piece of land in town belongs to virtually the community. I've put it into a museum trust. So if you think I'm going to gain from it, the lease that we would agreed with Chris Bennett was for 99 years. If any of you believe that I would gain anything out of it for 99 years, dream on. It is for the museum. No museum makes money. It has to have an income. I have battled this council for the last 4 years trying to get things on there to make it worthwhile keeping a museum. And it's frustrating when you're trying to do something for a community and it just isn't allowed, it seems. So that's where I'm at. I think Chris Bennett was, I'm going to say, screwed. He was led on to believe that he could have that housing. He spent 50 grand plus another probably 50 grand of time and gift. I mean, a lot of the engineers that worked for him did it for nothing. And they believed they could mitigate it. So it's really quite sad. The other thing that I just want to say very quickly is that if you come and have a look at the section, and right next door, 3 meters from that section to this section, there's a new house being built. Chris, I know you see it every time you go to council, and yet this one was turned down. I just don't understand where you're coming from. It's too late for Chris, I know that. And it's probably a blessing for me in a way, because I can now do something else with the land that's not going to tie it up for 99 years for the museum. But there it is. I'm really quite sad with what's happened. And as I said, there's also a proposal to put houses under the runway. Rimahoi. Now, I don't know, Stewie, how many years Motueka has snivelled, but the 40 years that I've been involved with council, the Motueka people have snivelled about the noise of the airdrome. And we're going to put a subdivision underneath the runway lead-in. You're joking me.
We're just about at time.
Thank
Paul.
you.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Your points are noted clearly.
It's gone on to 10 years, unfortunately, because nothing was done about it. As I said, without you come and have a look, you just don't believe it. But
Thanks, Paul. No one else for public forum. We're going to move to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest additional to, the usuals? No. And we have no later items. We're going to confirmation of the minutes. The minutes of the Environment and Regulatory Committee meeting held on Thursday, the 15th of June, be confirmed as a true and correct record of the meeting. Is there somebody willing to move? Councillor Ellis, thank you. A seconder, Councillor Mailing. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. And the confidential minutes for the meeting held on Thursday, the 15th of June, be confirmed as a true and correct record of the meeting. Is there a mover? Councillor Dowler, thank you. Have a second. Councillor Maru, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We don't have any presentations today. And we move to Group Manager Kim Drummond for your report, Kim. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Tabling the Group Manager's update report. I'll take the report as read, but just point out a couple of features of it. First to note is the first matter I cover is the licensing and consent survey, and that's something that the council does every 12 months. And what we're looking at there is the feedback from those who have received licenses or consents from us over a 12-month period. And we're seeking feedback from those folk as to how that service is operated in their minds. The questions that are being asked are now being standardised, and they've been asked for 3 years in a row. But I guess the point to note here is that it's quite different in terms of the nature of the services that are provided. In one end of the spectrum, it's more transactional. A dog licence, for instance, happens in a very short period of time. And at the longer end, you get into the more complex issues, which are around building consent decisions, and then even more complex often is the resource consent decision. So what we're surveying there is not quite apples and apples, it's apples and oranges. And what we see in terms of results is a slight variation from the transactional stuff being rated very highly, where the stuff that's taking a little bit longer in terms of a consent, slightly different feedback for us to work on. And staff take these survey results and look to improve on the services that they provide. And a couple of those metrics also feed into our annual report, which is telling our community how we're going, delivering on levels of service. The other feature that I just want to note is that there's been quite a flurry of policy activity from central government, and which is common in an election year as the government is tidying up its affairs and delivering on its policy undertakings. Those policy decisions then lead to a number of regulatory sort of requirements. So our regulatory framework is adjusted as a consequence of that. I mentioned a few of those that have come through in the regulatory space, but I'm also pointing to a couple of policy initiatives that are currently up and running, and they might fit more into the policy space, but there's a timing issue here in relation to the emissions trading scheme. Hence, it's come through into this agenda. So on that particular one, there is a consultation that needs to be, or the opportunity to feedback on a review of the emissions trading scheme and the role that permanent forestry has in that. That is due on the 11th of August. And for timeline purposes, we've tabled that here today. And the suggestion is that councillors who want to be involved or have an interest in that area might like to self-identify, and we can then set up staff to work with those councillors to come up with a submission that would be ultimately retrospectively approved at one of the committees because of the timing issue. The second one is the fact that we're noting the long-awaited National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity has landed. It's come through. It's been gestation, which has sort of carried through quite some time, but it's come alongside it a consultation around an idea of a biodiversity credit scheme, and that is there to try and incentivise landowners to invest in their biodiversity, and it also provides a potential funding mechanism for delivering on the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity. That too is open for consultation, but it's over a longer time frame. That consultation doesn't conclude until November, but it's but bringing it through here is the idea that we can also self-identify those councillors who want to work with staff as we go about formulating a draft submission on that for consideration by the wider council. So those are the main features of my report, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Kim. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. It's good news to hear about the proposal to have some credits, because it has been a cause of apprehension about the policy, policy statement for Indigenous biodiversity coming, because of the need to map significant natural areas, which has been of a lot of concern to our landowners. So if that can be partnered with the idea of credits, which has been raised by farmers during the consultation time for the Tasman biodiversity strategy, a lot of farmers actually raised that issue and said, look, it would make it much easier for us if there was some form of recompense for us to look after these significant natural areas. So I look forward to us actually being able to do a submission on that, and for that actually going hand in hand with the identification and the mapping of significant natural areas. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Kinmont.
Thank you, and through the chair, Mr. Drummond, your freedom camping legislation had just come out less than a month ago. Are the staff happy with the changes to the legislation?
It's just a slight clarification. It's regulations that have come through. So the legislation's hasn't been adjusted, but what we've got is a greater deal of definition around the regulatory environment. And in order to answer your question, I'll ask Adrian perhaps to pop up and comment on that.
Morena, Madam Chair, Morena councillors. So, sorry, the freedom camping legislation, the new infringement regime has actually been put out by the government, and it will be relating to various offences being liable to an infringement fine at different levels, depending on what they are. There is also legislation being put forward about self-containments of vehicles and what actually constitutes a self-contained vehicle. As yet, excuse me, as yet, all that regulation hasn't come into force. There's a bit of there's an actual term for it. It's like a waiting period to allow people to adjust to the fact that their vans may or may not be compliant with the new legislation. It's related to having a fixed toilet primarily, rather than just having a toilet you can remove and empty cassette. So there is still more mileage to be done on it. It's something that's been in the wind for quite a while. They have listened to quite significant feedback from local government, because at one stage they wanted to make every fine like $1,000 or $2,000. And if you can't find somebody 200, we didn't know how you were going to get 2,000 out of them. But so there's a bit more work to be done on that. And there is a briefing from the ministry in 3 weeks' time to give us an update on where we are. So it's not a done deal. There are elements. There is one infringement which is already in force, which means that we can fine, I think, $600 rather than $200 on one of the fines. But we haven't got all the information yet. So, and we need to get all the administrative stuff changed, like the level of fines on our system, pads, paper pads that we and it all takes a bit of time and a bit of money. But it is in train. There are some changes there.
Thank you. I've just got a follow-up around that, Adrian, in terms of the freedom camping. So you can only freedom camp on local authority land if your vehicle's self-contained. Just on the areas that are, what areas does that include? So I know previously there was going to be, we were going to have to go through a big process around, identifying everywhere but to keep people off land. But what's the situation now, please?
So, Madam Chair, what actually it says is you can only camp on local authority land if you're not self-contained, if the local authority agree to you doing it. So we actually fit in very nicely with the current regulations. So we have Fittle Street in Richmond, we have Alexander Bluff in the Motueka Highway, where people can actually camp in vehicles that are not self-contained, and that's enshrined in our bylaw.
Yeah.
We don't have any other areas. We removed them over the process of time. But what the government have tried to do, they've tried to take some of the weight off the council to say, you know, you're not allowed to camp in these places. You might think you can, but you can't unless we say they can. There's a bit of a reverse of what was their reverse engineering. Previously, people could assume they could camp on public land, although our bylaw has always prevented that. In some areas, if you are not self-contained, you can camp virtually anywhere. There's a couple of places you can. If you are self-contained, we are quite permissive in areas other than specific places like cemeteries, like proximities to various things like schools and car parks. So our bylaw fits in very nicely what the new regulations are saying. So in some councils, if they didn't have a bylaw, people thought they could use public land. We do have a bylaw. Our bylaw pretty much encompasses what the new legislation says. The only difference is now is what is a self-contained vehicle. So currently you could be in a vehicle which has got a cassette type toilet, which you can take out and use. Under the current NNZ standard, that is a self-contained vehicle. Under the new regulations, it will not qualify at a point in the future, and I think it's 2 years from now, they'll say you're no longer complying with the self-containment standard. So the self-contained status or otherwise is what's important when it comes to the bit of legislation you're talking to.
And so if you're self-contained by the new regulations correctly, you can camp on local authority land.
Some public land, other than stuff where we say you can. So for example, in our bylaw, all of Tarkaka Township, all of Motueka Township are areas where you cannot camp in a camper van on the street, on public land.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is nuisance complaints, cables over roads, that sort of thing. Obviously, if you go onto somebody's property, we don't have a call on that. Or if you go onto private land like a supermarket car park, we don't have control of that as well. But on public roads within urban areas, we tend to not permit freedom camping because of complaints, nuisance and everything else, even if you're self-contained.
Yeah. So if you are self-contained, you can camp on other local authority land.
Provided you don't cause a nuisance.
So that's going to be, that's sort of the significant shift, I suppose.
Well, not for us, it isn't. Not for us, because we've always done that. We've actually, within our bylaw, are actually quite permissive. So if you want to go onto a piece of public land which is not designated as an area where you cannot stay in our bylaw, provided you're not causing a nuisance, provided you meet the self-containment standard, we're not going to knock you off that land. The majority of people we have problems with are people who are not self-contained because they haven't got toilets to use. And where there are toilets, we don't often allow them to stay in those places.
It'll be interesting to see just where those areas are that become somewhere where
they're all in the bylaw.
People are using,
Yeah, they're all in the bylaw. They're actually done in maps in the bylaw so people know. And to be honest, people are getting wise to it now. We've actually got less of a problem with freedom camping than we've had in previous years, although pandemic and lack of visitors might add to that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Councillor Walker.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, can do.
Sorry, for some reason I can't get my face shown on the screen. Hey, on that same topic through you, Madam Chair, the freedom camping, Adrian, I was hoping you'd stay at the table. It's 5.12.3 around the homelessness, and it states that homeless people, we have a current practice on how we work with them and that they're referred to social care. How does that work? Like, how do we do, how does that process work within Tasman District Council? Because we asked at the community board for some stats and that wasn't so easy to gain. So I'm just wondering what the process is on what we do when we come across our homeless people. Adrian, thanks.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. We did provide the stats to the community board. I think that was last week when we were asked for them by staff at Motueka. So the stats are obviously only accurate at the time that our guys come across people who are homeless. And I think they gave us numbers of people they thought genuinely homeless. I think in Motueka, there were about 5 people they knew of. In Target, I think there were 3 people they knew of. And also in Richmond, there were a few as well. But the reality is, the difficulty is, how do you find a homeless person from somebody who's a freedom camper? Well, the feedback I get from my officers on the ground, and I agree with them, is it's normally quite easy to see if you've got somebody living in their car because they have to live in their car, and somebody's living in their car because they're on holiday. Although some people choose a lifestyle which involves traveling around the country in a van or a car, and that's their decision. So you can argue whether or not they're homeless. The issue we have, if we come across people and we genuinely believe that they are homeless and there's a welfare issue, the only phone number we have is for, I think, the Salvation Army. And also we give them information about MSD and people they can talk to. But again, you can lead a horse to water, and some people don't want to have any involvement with anybody or any of the authorities. So we don't want to move people on. We certainly wouldn't move people out of a healthy situation to an unhealthy one. And we certainly don't issue infringement fines to people who are genuinely homeless. But it's always this issue, and I've raised it at previous council meetings, how do you define what a homeless person is as opposed to somebody who decides to live in a van? It's fairly straightforward in some cases. I mean, we have come across single ladies with young children who obviously are in a car for a reason, and it's normally not a positive one, so we can work a bit with them. In other cases, it might be an older person who just likes touring around the country, and they are not a homeless person. That's just the way they want to live their life. So it's pretty difficult to do. We recently had one of somebody living in a shelter on a cycle trail in the middle of nowhere, and we had a complaint about them, and we said, well, what harm are they doing? And they weren't causing any harm. There were toilets available. And so we just worked with them and gave them contact numbers should they need them, and they moved on of their own accord. So I think the point I try to emphasize, my guys who are out there are trying to control freedom campers that cause nuisance, and they're not trying to force homeless people into worse situations than they already are. And there isn't a silver bullet that we're aware of at the moment.
Thank you. A follow-up, Councillor Walker?
Yeah, if you don't mind, thank you. Yeah, Adrian, thanks for what your team are doing. I guess I read the report and it says that you do referrals, but in actual fact, what you do is you give them information. You're not collecting their data. So if you find someone in a vehicle, you don't collect their data and pass it on as a referral. You're giving them advice on where they could go if they wanted some. And I guess that's the difference with the wording. Thanks.
Yeah, for you again, Madam Chair. We do also have our manager of control services does speak to Salvation Army, I believe, and he has got another contact, which I believe is MSD, and he makes them aware where people are. The actual referral information, we do give them the information. That's what we can do. We can ask for a name, an address, and a phone number from the person, but it has to be in relation to an offence. So if we don't think they've committed an offence, we can't legally force anybody to give us any information. So it's a privacy thing as well. So we walk a very difficult line. What we try to do is get the best result for the people we can get, but we cannot demand information of people if it's not relating to an offence. So that's another restriction for us.
Thanks, Adrian. Anything else, Councillor Walker?
No, it's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. And imagine in somewhere like in Mohu and Golden Bay, it's probably, I don't know how much of our business is to pass on contact details to Mohu as social services. So over there we've got a clear social service agency, and I imagine it wouldn't be difficult just to check in with people if they need to know that that outfit exists. And I know that MSS they'll be keenly aware, I think, of the people in the community who are homeless and are supporting what they can.
I think for you, Madam Chair, again, it would be helpful if we had some sort of formalised network within all the social services that we could actually tap into. The problem is, I don't really think it's a regulatory function, and we're seen, and I know people don't like using the word, but we're seen as council's policemen, but we're logical about what we do. We don't try to abuse people. We try to get people to comply for the right reasons. So, and I've mentioned it at previous council meetings, I think it's something we need to look at. And whether that's bringing in community service like Mohua or iwi in certain areas, I know have involvement with such things, and getting a group network who we meet and can talk to. I think, yeah, that's good. But again, I'm not sure where in council that would
Yeah.
originate.
Thank you, Adrian. Councillor Mayling,
Don't
You're
go,
s-
Adrian.
you're still there, I think.
Thank you, Madam
Hang in
Chair.
there.
I just wanted to ask you, Adrian, whether these new regulations, and the fines, when I read through them, have increased. Will that be on the campers app or something? Because otherwise it's going to cause real problems, one, to collect them. So will our freedom campers that come from around the world be able to understand the consequences? Because it needs to be on an app of some sort that they use.
Yeah, free again, Madam Chair. It will be put out by Campermate. And when we will have educational material, which we will give to people when we go to different sites and we speak to them all. I think the perception is at government level that all this problem comes from abroad, and the reality isn't the same. We probably get a sort of pretty even 50-50 split between resident New Zealanders and visitors. The problem with fining people is always the same. If people can afford to pay a fine, they're probably not going to be committing the offence. And so if we go out and we put heavy fines on people, we're unlikely to get a lot of success. And so it'll end up going into the court system. The court will either, if it is somebody from abroad, will either write it off, or they will say, well, you need to chase them off. And amazingly, we do get success where we chase people to Germany and the UK and the Netherlands to pay fines on occasion. Because we basically say, look, if you don't want to come back to New Zealand, you need to be aware you owe us this money. And I think, oh, I might want to go back to New Zealand, and they pay the fine. But we probably have, and I can't say this with my hand on my heart because I haven't checked the statistics this year, but we probably have as many New Zealanders don't pay the fine as we do have foreigners. But in that case, it goes into the court system and they eventually get tracked down. I think what you were probably alluding to are hire vans, and you can get a speeding fine paid for a hire company because they can take your credit card details. There's an inference in the legislation that you could do that, but there's no rule in the legislation that you can do that for a freedom camping fine. I believe it's one of the things that was included in the regulation, but I don't think it got through. I need to check up on that so that we can't go to whoever rental cars and say you've rented a van, they've got a fine that you need to get it paid, unfortunately. And the problem is as well, it's the 58 days. So if you commit offence today, you go back to Germany in 2 weeks' time, and then we come up with a fine that goes to court. And the rental firm said, oh, well, it went back to Germany 7 weeks ago. You can't do anything about it. It's natural justice. So there's always been that issue.
Thank you, I think.
I'm going to show you my RSA limp for the last time, hopefully. But
any further questions or Councillor Butler?
No, it's not on the freedom
Yeah.
camping, though I would say that everything's changed in Golden Bay. We haven't got the problems anymore. So I just wanted to ask a question about the prosecution of CJ Industries and just raise the issue that it's my understanding that this house that was burnt was actually a substantial, relatively modern house, which was, and my question is there anything in the RMA which can be brought to bear on complete destruction of a perfectly good house? And I appreciate that this was a prosecution for the burning, but it's not identified that it was actually a house that could be lived in by a family. So it removes a house from our housing stock. It's just a concern really because, with people having so much money that they can simply buy a property and completely destroy the house. We don't want that to see that increase.
So through the chair, the prosecution of CJ Industries was around the burning of demolition material and wet material, which created smoke. So on the one hand, there was toxic materials burnt, and on the other hand, there was smoke generated. So that's where the essence of the prosecution is. In terms of the wider issue about what folk can do if they wish to remove a house, and obviously there's a range of options. They can take the house to take it off site and have it recycled, which is, obviously sort of situation that works for many. If they were to choose to burn it, there's an opportunity to do that in association with the fire service, because the fire service appreciate having training systems. So, a house and fire, so you can do that in association with them. You can do that through a consented system, so you can actually seek authorisation. In that case, you're making sure, and also in the fire service case, that there's no contaminate or no particular materials are not present in the house that would cause offence. But if a person does choose to burn a house outside of fire season sort of thing, it becomes a case for us to only ascertain whether or not inappropriate materials were burnt. So there is a degree of, people can choose to do various things on their land. And if that involves burning a house as a means of removing it, our interest at that point, outside of a fire season, would be about what was burnt. And so we've got an evidential exercise in front of us to establish that inappropriate materials were burnt. But where those materials are established as being burnt, there's a pretty low tolerance in the court system for burning of inappropriate materials. And that's evidenced by this particular case. There's actually quite a high level of deterrent, offered through the courts for the activity that was observed.
This what I'm referring to is the destruction of a relatively modern, large, well-built house. The removal of it, and I appreciate that that there is an issue over burning, but it could have been just put into landfill or something like that.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. In terms of just this area generally, if say the demolition of a house, not like a good house, it's in good nick, architecturally built, full of a whole lot of beautiful natural tōtara, just as an example. If somebody demolishes that and digs a big hole and puts it in it and burns it, like what are the consent requirements needed to be able to do that?
So you're getting into the planning framework there, and what you can do as a permitted activity, and what you might want to do if you're getting authorisations for a consent. So there's a number of materials that are listed as being inappropriate and don't meet clean fill requirements, for instance. So if you're doing it under permitted activity, you'd be able to put into the ground what meets clean fill criteria. If you are seeking authorisation to do that, you would have a greater macro or micro assessment of your situation. It would probably be unusual for someone to seek consent to bury a demolished house.
Yeah, we'll take it up further. Thank you. In terms of your report, Kim, I just wanted to check a couple of sorry, just trying to find myself here. So in terms of the so it seems to me that our approach in terms of the catchment coordinators work and the farm plan process and helping landowners and farmers understand that all those processes that are in train. I just note the mention of people being perhaps or not vulnerable to industry capture. Is there some idea that there could actually be, this is a sort of with what's happening in that area, that there is a potential, I guess, for people to generate business and coming in and assisting people, I guess, as consultants around that work, which of course they can do. Could you say a little more about just your mention of that phrasing, I suppose?
Yeah, so in my report, I mentioned that a situation has been looked at in the Ashburton Lakes, where despite the efforts of a regulatory system around it, the lake suffered. So then in went the investigation to say, why was it that despite all the best efforts and the expectations that the surrounding land would be managed in such a way as it didn't end up with contamination to the lake. Contamination to the lake occurred. And in this particular exercise, it was established that the regulatory framework was not sufficiently robust to prevent that contamination. So yes, it signalled what was expected, but it then was unable to back it up with what would happen if those requirements weren't carried out. And so MFE have commissioned that piece of work, and that has been central to them designing the freshwater farm plan system that they have developed. And what it shows is that there's a core regulatory requirement that underpins this that must stay within the council. And so therefore the regulatory team that we have a set of obligations to make sure that regulatory bottom lines are not exceeded, while the auditing certification process is around trying to push farmers and the community into a higher standard. So how those two things come together in the freshwater farm plan regulations is a bit of a piece of artwork.
Yeah.
And so what I'm suggesting is that the Ministry for the Environment in promulgating these regulations are aware not to make it too open-ended, because things can go wrong despite best intentions. So what we are hoping that will come out of the framework that they've put in play is a really carefully nuanced approach where there are incentives for people to move beyond regulation, and our catchment coordinators are part of that system. But there is a bottom line in there to make sure that regulatory requirements are still being met. And I guess that's the system that we're now put in front of us. In rolling this out, MFE have taken care to not do it across the country at one time. Normally a regulation applies. You all play that game from day one. What they've said is we'd like to trial it in two sensitive areas. One is in the Waikato and the other is in Southland, so that we are learning from how these regulations are given effect. And there's all of council or through Te Kahika network, there's a lot of eyes on how that's playing out. So when it comes time for this to happen in Tasman, we will benefit from how this has happened elsewhere, but also we have the opportunity now to have quite a long run up into that situation. So our catchment coordinators are trying to develop that, I guess, the higher set of expectations while we wait for the regulations to land here, which will probably be in about 15, 18 months' time. Yeah.
Thank you, Kim. In terms of the ETS submission, so Kim's put in his report that he's proposing that councillors with an interest in this area of policy work, I'd like to work with staff to finalise the submission. Deadline's 11 August. Is there maybe it's a show of hands if people are interested? Councillor Mailing, Councillor Dowler, Councillor Butler. Any others? Great. I did. Thank you. So we've got a note of those.
So Dwayne will lead that.
Someone's got a note of those people who are happy to contribute. Thank you for that. And we need a mover and a seconder for the resolution for the report, which is that we receive the report. Councillor Dowler, better move, and second by Councillor Ellis. I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. And thanks, Kim. I appreciate your keeping us appraised of. There's a lot going on, and to have these rechecking ins around where things are at with each of these processes is very helpful for us to maintain our overview and their understanding of it all. So thank you. I'm going to move to we're going to move to 8.3. So different than our order, I think, in our yes. So ground and surface water take compliance monitoring report.
So we have Neil
Welcome.
presenting the report, but we have a few staff online to help answer some of the questions that may arise.
Yeah. Welcome, Neil. Over to you. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'll take the report as read and happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Great. Councillor Mailing.
Well, thank you, Neil. I've been looking at these reports for a number of years, and I think I first started on the dry weather task force in about 2002 as an irrigator. And what I've noticed is you've got a big increase over the years now of electronic that's coming in, which must make it better. Because I know it's been a trial, and you've still got some people that want to text, want to phone, want to mail, but the number is less. So you're getting what I read was it's getting better. Would that be a fair comment? And I know you'd probably like it even better yet.
Yeah, I think the way we couched the report this year was probably after suggestion that we'd like to see a bigger picture, through the years. And I've attempted to do that with this year's report. And you can see with the weekly readings return types that the trend has remained fairly even. I did mention last year, we've managed to get rid of fax returns for the most part. There are still one or two on Pigeon Post, but the majority pretty much stay the same. The council's direct web entry is still the firm favourite method for returning.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Appreciations, maybe?
All of those, Madam Chair, if I may, just a question. Thank you, Neil and team, for the report. Just that you talked about the Waimea Community Dam is going to change how you're operating. I thought a lot of that was going to be telemetry to as part of their consents, or is that just new consents?
Through you, Madam Chair. So there are a number of resource consented water takes that will require telemetry. Not all, but the vast majority, it will remain a choice of return method. There are a number of consents where it has been prescribed, and I believe that's 11, where the resource consents themselves actually contain a condition that requires them to telemeter, but it is not a case that all of them will require telemetry.
And are those 11, if I may, Madam Chair, predominantly new consents or?
No, it will be, the requirement is for consents that are unaffiliated to the Waimea Dam and that are over a certain volume for their weekly take.
Yeah, that makes good sense, actually, when you think about it.
Just going to come to Kim for a response too.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps if I could just add to that, while there is the unaffiliated below that level don't have a telemetry obligation, there is, and Neil can correct me on this, a requirement, an enabling provision in the consents that they can be required to move into a different reporting system on the instruction of a particular level officer. So as we move into an operational dam environment, we need to look quite closely at what leverage we can bring to bear to remain within the consented framework, but to give us greater real-time capability.
Well, that makes sense.
Neil might correct me if I've got anything wrong with that.
No, that is correct. Every consented water take will have a small clause in it that whilst most water takes are required to give weekly returns, if compliance and the head of compliance and monitoring decides that and provides detail, that can be changed. That is a standard clause in every resource consent water take across the district.
That could be changed to daily, is that what you're saying?
So should council require it?
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? Oh, Councillor Kinnamont.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Green, I've read your report and it's one of the best reports I've seen. Very concise. Not much waffle. You know what I mean? And it's very good. So compliments to yourself and whoever assisted you in this report.
Thank you. I would have to point out that it's not just me that compiles this report. I do get a lot of help and input from my team, especially my administrative help, Vicky Clark. She is the techno whiz that goes in and delves and pulls out all these stats and information, and actually the nice graphs that you've got showing you what's occurred over the previous 5 seasons is very much down to Vicky. So we can thank her for that.
Thank you. It's great, isn't it, to have the people who are in behind and doing a lot of the key stuff acknowledged here. That's great. I saw a little applause happening down the back there as you were speaking, which is great. And of course, the good news story here, the key thing here, 98% were rated fully compliant, so 900 out of 921 active resource consents. So let's not overlook that. That's a very good stat. Anything further? We need to have a mover for the receiving the report. Councillor Mailing and seconded by Councillor Deputy Mayor Bryant. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much for the report and the work of your team too. Great. Thanks. And we move to 8.2 annual farm dairy effluent compliance monitoring report. Seems like a quick year, doesn't it? Doesn't seem so long ago. Yeah, that we were here. Welcome, Carl.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I will take the report as read. There's only a few things I was going to touch on. One, of course, is that I was simply the compiler of this report, so the recognition has to go to those out on the farm, on the sites that did all the hard work. So that was, and I just acknowledge that, like Kat Bunting did the first half of the surveys before she moved on to the catchment facilitator role, and our very capable water metering student continued the rest of the survey. And it was just up to me to then put it all together and just revise the report. So a lot of hard work from those two. Overall, the compliance again was very high. And just the thing that's worth noting is that we had no moderate or significant non-compliance this year, which is really pleasing. So the non-compliance that we did find was minor, and we could resolve it fairly quickly. So that is good, and that's a sign of our farmers putting that effort in and maintaining a consistent compliance approach to their operations and their awareness of their regulations at the time of the inspections. They were obviously really good. Thirdly, and that's the thing that's just kind of, I think, to highlight is obviously that I've made reference in the report that we will, the dairy effluent monitoring program will continue. I know there's a lot of freshwater farm reforms that are coming through with legislative change, and as a result, so your freshwater farm plan and other aspects will have a bearing on the regulatory environment and the horizon coming up. But there is a need for us to continue this program, but we will do the program slightly differently. So the program now will be split between the 2 freshwater compliance officers, which I've highlighted in the report. And the reason for that, as we've sort of stated, is to give a more holistic approach. So they will be picking up not just the farm dairy effluent will form part of the other things that they will be checking on. So the farmers will see us and be talking to us about other things than just dairy effluent. We're talking about the synthetic nitrogen, stock exclusion, and the intensive winter grazing and all that as more of a one-stop shop parcel of work. So to follow on from that, the dairy report probably won't in next year look like this, because I think what we'll do is we'll present to you guys a more overall report on that area of work. So you'll get the dairy effluent outcomes plus all those other matters that we can introduce into a broader report. So so there'll be a slight change in that proposed work.
Thanks, Carl. Deputy Mayor Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Carl, for the report. And thanks for the acknowledgement of the CAT and the other staff that have done this work. It's really appreciated. It does seem that we continue to have a high level of compliance, and number of dairy farms are continuing to go down. and things are changing. Just wanted to ask you, if I may, a couple of questions around the catchment facilitators doing this monitoring. So that will become part of their normal work. Will they be doing it in the catchments that they facilitate, or will there be some cross-pollination so that they're doing different areas, or how will that work in practice? Where previously, by and large, Cat's done it pretty much on her own, and people have known who the contact person is.
Through Madam Chair. So the catchment facilitators are obviously Merca's team. They're slightly different. So we're sort of freshwater officers, but we will replicate. There's only 2 of them. Obviously Jane's doing the role now, and we've just advertised and offered the new role, Cat's replacement, to a person who's accepted. So that's good news. So those 2 will have to try and split those roles. They're predominantly compliance and monitoring roles, so they will be doing the work in regards to our obligations to enforce it, monitor and enforce the regulations. But they will tie in intrinsically with what the catchment facilitators are doing. So we're modelling it off of those FMUs, those draft FMUs that I think still have to be finalised. But obviously we have to try and logically split those, being only 2 staff members. We're trying to get synergy with the facilitators to work together with them. So so that's what we'll effectively be doing, splitting those 2 staff across those FMUs, working with the catchment facilitators who are assigned to do those areas. There's 4 facilitators.
Will they have enough? For you, man, will they have enough capacity and facilities to be able to do all the work we want them to do in both of those areas, catchment facilitators and dairy monitoring? And has this been tried anywhere else?
There's different models and different resources around the regional councils. It's a bit hard to compare. I've never actually compared what the other councils are doing. Their teams are so different, and they have different structures in some of their teams. So I guess we'll find out. We think we can manage it. The farm planning regulations and other stuff will obviously drive compliance in a different way through the certification and auditing process, and plus as farmers and people subject to the NES freshwater obligations will slowly pick up. Hopefully we won't have it's hard to know, but we won't have a lot of work hopefully in an enforcement space, but you just don't know. But we definitely need to be on the ground monitoring, so it could there's a lot of stuff that's happening, so it's a bit of an unknown.
Thank you. Kim's got a comment too.
Perhaps if I just pick up on that or a couple of the questions is it really speaks to that point that I made before regarding how do we fit a incentive-based or non-statutory sort of approach with the catchment facilitators are following with a statutory set of regulatory requirements. And getting that balance right is the key to being effective. And I guess Carl is managing the resources that are speaking to those regulatory bottom lines, and the experience that we had when we looked at that Ashburton situation is to make sure that the 2 are working in harmony. And so that is a big part of what Carl's resources are doing. They're putting in, so they're working with that catchment facilitation approach, which is led out of Rob Smith's team. And so there's a very strong connection there. In terms of where has this been done before, well, coming from the Canterbury context, very much this model has been sort of in play there for 15 years. Where you have in those cases coordinators that bring in catchments together, and then the fit to the services that are operated right across the council under that oversight of an individual operator. And the question that they faced in Ashburton was, had they gone too far into the non-statutory?
Right.
And that was the answer. Yes, they had gone too far in relying on non-statutory, and they'd left the statutory bit behind, and the lake had suffered. So there's experience there. Yes, it's been done. Did they get it right? Not in that situation. Will this new framework get it right? Hopefully.
Yeah, I guess one thing in our favour, with the high level of compliance and low level of non-compliance, is going to make it somewhat easier, isn't it?
Well, it sort of is, but it's compliance with the permitted activity rather than the Canterbury system is compliance with a heavily consented system. So it's not quite the same.
Thank you both for your thorough
Councillor Cannonmont and then Councillor Mailing. And we're looking for a mover and a seconder to receive the report too. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. This is a bloody good news report. Dairy farming gets a bad rap, but looking at these figures here, these are brilliant. So we need to get the flag up the pole and tell people how good the dairy farmers are. So what I'd ask, the question is what are we doing about publicising to the media how good the dairy farmers are?
I think that on media are in the room. I presume that they will probably pick the story up, I guess. But we do try to message it as well in the community, and this report is available, including the stats on our website.
I see we need to publicise this as much as we can to support the dairy farmers who are under a lot of pressure, both financially and mentally.
If I could just add to that, the key function of regulation is to find problems and the real problem, fix them, and tell a story. So that's the third end of this, that once you've got it in a frame where you think you're on top of it, the story can then be told. So I think what you're talking to is where we probably need to take this more into that third domain, because the work is showing that there's a really positive response by the farmers in our community.
And over the last years, the report has been, this good. There's a good history here, and that's a part of why we're not going, well, isn't this fantastic? Because we're sort of used to it being fantastic, like a very good response. And we do have media releases come out, and I'm sure one will come out, letting people know about this. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Mailing.
Thank you, Carl, for your report. And as I said, we've seen really good reports, but I can remember years ago when we used to have one or two farmers that caused us some heartache. So, and the best part was that particular farmer, most of his farms were in another district rather than ours. But the concern I have going forward is if you look at the regulations that come in 2025, with stock exclusion from our rivers, that's where it'll be a challenge for our sheep and beef farms to have the same standard of what we've got with our dairy farms. Because I certainly see when I walk our rivers in our districts, sheep and beef in the rivers where they shouldn't be. It's not the law now, but I've taken photos in the past. So it will be a challenge for some of our farmers that have been doing things a certain way for a long time to suddenly have to exclude their stock from an awful lot of waterways. So that's a lot of electric fencing. And when you get floods, you get damage. So, that's the sort of thing that will be a real challenge for our district going forward. And these catchment facilitators are going to be a big help with that, but there'll still be a regulation side. And I think the older farmers, or the ones that are more set in their ways, shall I say, will be the ones that will take the biggest change.
If I could just respond to that, yes, and that's where the stock exclusion rules are coming and how they're coming into the frame, and what Carl is pointing out about having a wider scope for your compliance people on farm. So the story needs to broaden, and I just also would like to point out that Carl is connected to a network where this is being looked at across all councils. So he's part of the Compliance and Enforcement Special Interest Group, which is part of the Te Uru Kahika network. So the insights from how this is happening across all different domains is, Carl's benefiting from that. And so that is becoming more of a respected discipline now. The regulatory function is gaining in prominence across the regional sector because these things need to be confronted, resolved, and we need to tell our story. So this is part of a puzzle that I think is being, there's pieces of this puzzle all across the country at the moment.
Thank you for that. And I'm happy to move the report.
Thank you. Councillor Butler. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. It's going to be quite a challenge, isn't it, for the catchment facilitators and the new compliance monitors to work out who does what and it's going to be quite important that the facilitators don't get caught up in compliance issues too much, so that they are can have an advocacy role and supportive role. But my question is as to, and you may not be able to answer this, but the third part of the puzzle is the auditors of the farm plans. And my understanding is that they simply audit the farm plan, but do they have any other role in monitoring and compliance as well as our own staff?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I don't think anyone's really, I mean, Merck, I don't think she's online, is she? May have another view of it, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure at this stage how that will play out. But obviously the group managers got his hand up. So it's through the chair on that one. That is precisely why it's been rolled out across the country into hotspots. So all eyes are on exactly how do you get that non-statutory approach that farmers probably more relate to, working in harmony with the statutory requirement. So we're going to find where that sweet spot is by looking at what the experiences for the other two councils are. And so that's going to give us a bit of a litmus test. In the meantime, we're trying to find that spot ourselves.
The auditors are not council staff, are they? So that's a bit of an unknown game for us, isn't it, going into the future? And we're going to have to coordinate that and run with it.
Yes, so through the chair. So I think the sort of regional councils do appoint, or in our case, unitary councils appoint the auditors. But yeah, it's quite a defined role.
Thank you. We just need a second to receive the report. Councillor Kinnemons, thank you. It's another good news story, isn't it, for us, and particularly the low risk non-compliance. Just being able to read that actually that is very low risk, and that there isn't we've lost a moderate category. We've got a nil there now, which is very good. And it's helpful, I think, to be able to just recap on the history of dairy farming and those shifts and trends in the district. So thank you for the report, and please pass on our appreciation to those that are working in your area and your team. So it's been, the resolution's been moved and seconded, so I'm going to put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Carl.
Chair, I'm not sure if it's an oversight or deliberate, but notice there's no chair's report in this agenda. I did have an issue I wanted to raise just around the issue that was raised in the public forum, and if we're going to respond or do anything about that.
Yeah, there's been quite a lot of correspondence between the initiator of the project, the housing project, and council consents team. In a range of roles within council, so there has been quite a bit of response around that. This isn't the first. This isn't like an initial approach around the matter.
Is there anything further going to happen? Like he did invite us to go and have a look, whether there's any desire around the table to do that, or any need.
Yeah, I think it's something that we can discuss. Perhaps offline around how we might consider that. But, yes, I don't think it's quite the time to speak about that, but we can, I think offline we can have a discussion around perhaps finding out the way that we might better understand, if we don't already, some of the complexities in the township of Tākaka. And I do understand some of them in terms of the floodings, areas, zoning. And in terms of this particular application, I think if there's things that we're wanting to understand further, other than the information that we have been emailed information yesterday or last night around this issue. So I think we can have a conversation about it if there's something further for us to understand how we might go about that.
Thank you.
And in terms of chairs reports, I think at our workshop, didn't we, with Mr. Mr. Vern. And he did raise that he questioned the purpose of chairs reports really, and so Christine doesn't do one either, and or Councillor Mackenzie. And if there are matters that we particularly need to raise, but we may have gone into a process whereby it's expected or it's usual, and so then what should we write about it? But so that's the reason I'm not doing a chairs report unless there's something I particularly want to raise.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
At a meeting. Thank you. Anything further? I'm going to close the meeting with karakia. I thank you all for your participation. Karakia tātou, kia hiki te kōrero, kia wātia, kia mama te manawa o te tangata, kia ke te ara mō tātou e oro nei, ko rongo ki runga, kia tina hui e tae ki e. Let discussions be lifted, clear away and ease the hearts of people, keep focus on the path of life, say yes. Thank you.